Always love hearing from you, Jeff. Thank you. So great to see you again at another Opal Summit. Really quick about Jeff, for those of you who may not have heard of him before. Jeff has over 20 years of experience in sales generation, leadership development, coaching, and corporate education, and has a passion for helping others learn while influencing behaviors to drive performance. So, a lot of good things there. So, Jeff, without further ado, he will be discussing how successful leaders influence your organization and your bottom line. I'll hand the mic to you, Jeff. Take it away.
Excellent. Thank you, Charlene. And first and foremost, can you hear me okay?
Oh, yes, I can hear you great. And your screen.
I'm going to pull up my screen here. It should be coming up.
I see it. If you could just put in presentation mode, it'll be perfect.
Sorry about that. There we are. Can you see that okay, Charlene?
I can see it, but it doesn't appear to be in presentation mode.
Let's do that. Let me make an adjustment here. There we go.
Thank you, Jeff. You're all set.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, sorry about that. Well, I have to first and foremost build on what Tom said. I'm right there with you, Charlene. Excuse me, that went one too far. His last comment about the plan is never the plan. That I highlighted that as well. So thank you, Tom. I must say hello to everyone first and foremost. Thank you for joining us. Great to be with you today. Really appreciate your attention. I have to say that I'm already a step behind Tom because I do not have a wonderful accent. There'll be no guessing to where I come from. It's pretty obvious, but certainly enjoyed hearing him and really his insights. I made some notes and really going to try to connect some of the things that I talk about with his insights around culture, around trust, around empathy, around the plan not being the plan. But we're going to kind of connect the dots around managers. And as you see here on the slide, how successful managers influence your organization and your bottom line. And I'll begin with where Tom ended. And that was around that quote of the plan is never the plan. But then one of the things that he said at the very end is, but the end goal is the end goal and the outcomes are the outcomes. And so we're going to spend about the next 25 minutes or so with you thinking about what's the connection between managers, and in this case, successful managers. How do they influence the organization and the people in the organization to ultimately impact that bottom line? So looking forward to the next 20, 25 minutes or so with all of you. I'll just give you a quick background of who we are and who American Management Association is. We are fortunate enough to have been around for about 100 years or so now, and that is a little bit about our background and experience. We are fortunate enough to be considered global leaders in talent and development, and frankly, humbled by that. So appreciate giving you that perspective today as well. And our focus is really on transforming people and organizations. And I say that on various different levels, whether it's an entire team, whether it's a department, whether it is an entire organization, but transforming people to give them the performance, skills, behaviors, and capabilities that they're looking for, that they need to increase their probability, of being successful. So just a little nugget of who we are and who American Management Association is. The information that I'll be going over with you today comes from a lot of research that we have done as well. So just to give you some perspective on what is it, where is this information, we'll also quote some others as we look at a lot of really thought leadership out there and connect it to our perspective, again, around connecting strategy and results and really looking at the management capability and leadership capability in between. So before I do that, I love the English language and I love words. And so as we were putting this together and connecting it to Opal's concept and theory of the day around connecting workforce development to business outcomes, and we talk about managers' influence, I had to go back and just say, what do we actually mean by influence? So simply enough, the capacity to have an effect on the character, development, or behavior of someone or something. Three key words: character, development, or behavior. And what we're going to really focus on, and again, like Tom, try to give you 2 or 3 or 4 nuggets of information in our time together, is that character component, is that development component, is that behavior component of our managers as leaders, and ultimately, how do they, again, influence the organization, and ultimately, excuse me, the bottom line. So before we do that, let's kind of back up a little bit and look at some data on management. I think these are some interesting numbers, but just so we understand who is our management audience, we've got about 24 million, and I will tell you, these are US numbers, just in case you're wondering, 24 million managers and supervisors in the workforce. A lot of managers. About one manager for every 5 employees. So you're looking at about 20% of the workforce. Our compensation, however, is about 30%. So when you think about your budget for an organization, about 30% of that goes to managers. Why do I put these in front of you? To give you a sense of the importance that we place on managers. And again, thinking about the link of, all right, what do my management team do from a learning and development standpoint to impact results, to impact, excuse me, the bottom line? Now, the other side of that is, what if they're not as effective as we want them to be? Okay, so a few notes around that. About $1 trillion in annual sales is wasted due to inefficient management. That is a staggering number. And let's just say, for the sake of research, that that's even half of that is accurate. Still a significant number of dollars that are wasted under this umbrella of inefficient management, which is why we put a big spotlight on it from an L&D standpoint. The second point, managers account for 70% of the variance in employee engagement. So why did I put that one up there? We are hearing and seeing and reading a lot more around engagement and how critical it is right now. Tom mentioned the link to the world that we live in right now around COVID. Well, this number that you see that Gallup did was in the early stages of COVID, so early 2020. This number we have seen increase quite a bit in terms of engagement. The need and desire and want for engagement from individuals has significantly increased. It was already, managers were already responsible for 70% of it. That number continues to go up. Why? Because we're in different locations. Our hybrid setup has played an enormous role in that. And then lastly, poor management affects employee productivity. And I can go on. It indirectly has consequences for workplace innovation. There's turnover issues, there's morale issues, there's a lot connected to poor management, particularly and most notably the effects it has on the results inside of an organization. So again, thinking about manager impact, what happens when that's not as strong, not as good, not as effective, not as efficient as we want those capabilities to be. So how do we turn that focus, and how do we turn the connection to, hey, I've got the strategy of an organization over here, I've got results over here, and I've got managers in the middle. What does that look like? The focus should be on the impression that a manager has directly and indirectly every day. So what do I mean by that, and why do I use the words that I use? If you think about the word impression says I leave something behind. So as a manager, what am I leaving behind every day with my team? Am I influencing them? Am I encouraging them? Am I leaving in the other side of the fence a stain behind that makes them feel, maybe they're not, they're not willing to be as productive as I'm looking for. So what kind of message, what kind of impression do I leave as a manager, directly or indirectly? I'll give you examples of that. It's one thing when we're talking to our people as managers. It's another thing to point out what we think as managers that people don't see. So what I often say, and what we say to our clients a lot, is you as managers and you as leaders are being watched all the time, even when you least expect it. I'll give you an example. The other night, and I try not to send messages to my team, so I'm fortunate enough, I have a great team of 10 or 11 folks. And the other night, I'm sending messages, and I get a call the next morning from one of my team members, and she said, I see how late you work. Wasn't even thinking about the impression, again, that I was leaving on the team, because I talked to them about, hey, finish up, do what you got to do during the day, and try to leave things, spend time with your family, balance. But it was one of those opportunities to say the direct and indirect impact that we leave on our team every single day. So thinking about that. Second one, and this gets a little bit of pushback sometimes. Manager activity does not get things done. Now you might scratch your head a little bit and say, Jeff, what are you talking about that? Individual activity gets things done. The job of managers is to influence and inspire that activity. So think about the role of managers and what they do and how do they in fact inspire and influence activity of individuals. Let me talk about the word activity for just a moment. The other thing that I will say about that, activity and productivity are two very different things. Okay. I happen to be, like many of you, I'm in a home office right now. I could be very active. I could get up from the chair. I could run around my office. That's activity. That is not necessarily productive activity. So as we think about activity and the actions that we ask our people to perform as leaders, is it proactive, or excuse me, is it productive activity? We'll talk more about that as we look at some competencies. But I just wanted people to understand, and we spend a lot of time talking to organizations about this, the concept of a manager influencing their team to make and help them be more productive. So what does that look like? Let me kind of break this particular slide down for you. I'm going to start with the blue, excuse me, the blue line at the top and give you kind of a general high level look, and then we'll get a little bit more detail. I mentioned strategy on the left-hand side, okay? What's the organizational strategy? Tom talked a little bit about this. Is there vision? Is there strategy? Is there clarity around that? What exactly does that look like? On the far right, there's results, performance, success, what people are actually doing and achieving, the outcomes. Right in the middle is where the manager fits. Manager is connecting that strategy of the organization to results. All right, so what does that mean? Take me another step further, Jeff. Here's what that means, and I'll jump to the bottom of the screen. Organization established the strategy, they established the goals. The next one over is that manager or supervisor. They are influencing the behavior to drive performance through knowledge and skills. Okay, all right, we're tracking with you, Jeff. Move to the next one. Employee then executes action based on the manager's competence to lead. So here's where the connection happens. And then you see on the far right there, we're talking about ultimately the results. So the link between the organizational strategy, where are they headed, what is it they're trying to achieve, to what people, everyday individuals on your team or inside the organization are doing to ultimately achieve those results. So we can't overlook, and I'll refer to it kind of as the linchpin. If you think of what a linchpin does, it keeps the wheel on the axle, which keeps it connected to the car. That connectivity that a manager has from strategy of the organization, what are we trying to do, to achieving ultimately results and outcomes. Very strong connection. So let me get to a little bit more detail of what does that look like for our leaders. So okay, Jeff, I got that. I got the management capability. I've got leaders. What in fact do leaders and managers need? They need two things. And we're seeing this more and more. And I appreciated what Tom said about the world that we're living, because I want to make that connection as well. They need character and they need competence. We used to spend a lot more time talking about the competencies of managers. That has shifted. There is a much bigger spotlight given the things that are happening in the world around character. So character to influence positively and competence to influence effectively. So it's both what you do and how you do it. And the analogy that I'd always use is we know people, we know managers, we know leaders that get a lot done. But unfortunately, some of them leave a bloody trail in terms of how they might have treated people, things they might have said, what the way they might have treated a customer, the way they might have treated some internal people, what they, those types of things. So thinking about both pieces, the character of a manager as well as the competence of a manager. Character represents the truth, of who you are and what you stand for. Again, an enormous spotlight on character under this umbrella of management capability. Character is an Abraham Lincoln quote here. Character is like a tree and reputation like a shadow. The shadow is what you think of it, but the tree is the real thing. So what do people see in your managers from both a competence level, but certainly a character level? And it is becoming more and more important as we look at this connection between strategy and results and manager capabilities. So let's get into a little bit more detail on what that is. So some core subject areas, and I will tell you that this is, and you'll see this at the bottom of the slide here, this is based on a comprehensive study we did over 2 years of over 11,000 people, and really looking at managers and leaders and saying, okay, what are the core subject areas that a manager, a really good, effective manager needs to have? And there's a reason they're in this order. So I'm going to go through each one of them for a few minutes, and then I'll talk about why they are in this order. The first one, professional effectiveness. So mastering of personal awareness. So first and foremost, as an effective manager, it's got to start with you, and you having a concept and an understanding of yourself. Do I have self-awareness? What are those interpersonal skills? How do I enable individuals? How do I help them manage themselves? How do I help manage myself? How do I communicate? All fitting under professional effectiveness. So we say it begins with you as a leader, you as a manager, to be self-aware. Second one, now it goes externally. Relationship management, the ability to establish and maintain, professional relationships to support the goals. Here's the big word, and Tom talked about it too, a culture of trust and collaboration, which we're going to come back to in a few minutes. Can we establish that as managers, as leaders, as managers? The relationship I create inside the organization, the relationship I have with clients, the relationship I have with my team, all under that umbrella of relationship management. You will also see that these first two are very human concepts. Professional effectiveness, aware of self; relationship management, aware of others, and that includes everybody inside the organization and outside the organization. Then our second two core areas, business acumen. As a manager, I've got to have a sense about the finances, the function, the strategy. And we also linked in here the customer focus, because without the customer focus, the business results and outcomes won't be there. So connecting the dots under business acumen. And then the last one, and this isn't to say that analytical intelligence isn't as important. This is just getting us thinking about the first two that apply more to me, the human side, versus the business. And then the last one being analytical intelligence, the ability to apply systematic thinking, analysis, data, and what do I do with it? One of the things that we run into here a lot is a lot of managers and leaders are looking at, we hear a lot about big data and what it is and so on and so forth. There's a willingness to look at it, but a lot of managers then say, what do I actually do with it? How do I put it into action with my team such that it leads to outcomes and business outcomes and results? So 4 core areas that we focus on, and again, talk to a lot of clients about. A lot of this, again, comes from the research that we did over 2 years in really focusing on what is a leader, what does a manager need to be effective, to ultimately connect the dots between strategy over here and results over here through people. So if I break those down a little bit more for you, we've broken these down into competencies, and I encourage you to just think about your own competency models and what you have in place right now. Here's what we did. And I'll start on the left-hand side and just kind of take a little bit of time to walk through each of these. Professional effectiveness. What are some core competencies under there? Communication. Critical right now. We're hearing more and more needs for it. Hearing more and more of a need for it because of the COVID world that we're living in. Time management, emotional intelligence is another one I would put a spotlight on. We are regularly talking to clients about it, given what's going on and the psychology behind COVID and what it's doing to people and individuals, and frankly, families as well. And presentation skills. All 4 of those core competencies underneath professional effectiveness, again, in order for a manager to be as effective and efficient as possible. Second one, relationship management. Conflict management, motivation, collaboration. Here comes the word we're talking about, influence, delegation, coaching, and managing change. Okay, well, let me give you some perspective on those. Think about how these have changed in the past year. Collaboration's different. We're not all in the same place. Motivation's different. I don't see my people every day or my team every day. Okay. Influence is different because we're not right next to people anymore. So is delegation. I can't just hand something over the cubicle and say, hey, can you help me work on this? We're in different locations. Coaching as well. I don't necessarily see people regularly, or may not as a manager see people regularly. So coaching has changed. So even within these, and again, the plan is never the plan. Here's the competencies, but how do these adjust in times of change? Which is our last one there, change management. So some critical things under relationship management. that a manager needs to have, again, to be effective in today's world and environment, and connect those dots. Moving over, business acumen, and what do we find in there? Managing projects, still have to have that capability, certainly as a manager, and getting things done. Again, getting things done through people. Financial acumen, customer focus, and then talent management. How do I bring on right people? And I always say, bring on the right people, doing the right things, in the right place, and frankly, even at the right time. Do I have all of those set up under talent management? And then the last one on the right, again, not to diminish this one at all, it just happens to be the order, but analytical intelligence, critical thinking, and that capability. How do I think analytically as a manager and as a leader? How do I problem solve? And how do, again, do I understand data? What's behind the data? And how do I make adjustments accordingly for myself and my team to impact results? I mentioned trust. Tom mentioned trust. I was glad he did. So I want to just come back to the importance of trust and what we're hearing and seeing, because it's such a key character trait. We're getting a lot more requests and conversations on how do I build trust, again, given the world that we're living in. So I just want to give you some data points around trust, and one or two that I don't have up here. 1 in 3 employees don't trust the leaders in their organization. 1 in 3. Pretty staggering number. It's actually a painful number, but that's the trust level that they have or don't have with their managers and leaders. 46% of employees place a great deal of trust in their employees. Now, it's kind of good news, bad news. So half of employees trust their other employees and their fellow employees, or just slightly under half. You want that certainly to be higher, but it also says a lot about I'm more trustworthy to my fellow employees than many people are to their managers and to their leaders. So again, thinking about that trust quotient, what it is to peers and with peers versus your manager or your leader. 15% of those same folks report very little or no trust at all. And that's inclusive of employees and managers. And then the last one, which I just put up as a generational component, Gen X places the least amount of trust on both employees, and I didn't even add it there, and management as well. So that generation in particular is one to pay attention to, of the trust factor linked to managers and leaders. One that is not up here that just came out actually the end of 2020, it was a Harvard Business study, and they talked about the concept, believe it or not, and this one kind of hits you hard too. 59% of employees would have a stronger trust connection to a stranger than to their manager. 59%. Trust a stranger more than I trust a manager. So I point that out as character gets a much bigger spotlight under capabilities to allow individuals to get things done. Putting that spotlight on it, one of those core components is trust. And again, I didn't know what Tom was going to talk about, and I was glad to hear that it was linked into that as well. It's also linked into emotional intelligence. It's linked into empathy. So the connection between allowing your team and providing them the opportunity to get the most done as managers and leaders, there's a strong component around character. And one of those character traits is directly linked to trust. So I'm coming up on my time. I always like to give you some questions to think about. And all right, what do I do with this? And how do I walk away from this thinking a little bit further? So some questions for you to consider as you put these pieces together. What can your managers do to connect strategy and results? They link those two together. What are those activities? What are those actions? What are those knowledge and skills? And how do we, as leaders in L&D, make sure that we are making that connection for them? What are the core competencies your managers need? I went through that study of the 16 that we focus on, that we've uncovered. You may or may not have those. They might match up a little bit differently. You may only have 5, you may have 7. That's okay. But thinking about what are those core competencies that managers need, again, to link strategy and outcomes. What actions can your team take every day to execute on strategy? And that's really what we're asking our management team and our leaders to do, is how do I impress? And again, I go back to the word I started with earlier around impression and influence. How do I leave that behind on the team so that they can be productive as possible every day? And then lastly, how can your managers, both through character and competence, and again, two core things that we see and hear regularly, influence the team to produce results, not just through their competence, but through their character? Do people want to perform and do things based on the relationship that they have with the manager? And again, that looks a little bit different than it did in the end of 2019. In the world that we are living in and the lack of connectivity that we have face to face with a manager, what can they do? How can they influence the team to ultimately produce results in this ever changing environment? So I'm going to take a breath there. And Charlene, I'm going to open it up to you for questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Jeff. I was taking pictures as you were going through there because there was so much I couldn't write it down fast enough. But one question that had come in is how can we prioritize the four primary subject areas of management?
Great
Is that
question.
possible?
Yeah. Good question. How do you prioritize the four? I really, and it's one of the reasons, sorry, I lost my slide there. There we go. One of the reasons I list them in that order is to really think about as a leader and as a manager, let me start with self-awareness. So I would almost prioritize them in those four to simply getting people to understand as leaders and managers, where are they? And what I didn't go down, and part of it was just because it was time related, is and this is sometimes hard to hear as a manager and leader, is I don't necessarily know or even I'll say care what you think about yourself, but what does your team think about you? So taking that one step further. So I'd really say, choosing one or two of those to begin with, but I think it's in today's environment, it's one of the first two. It's either professional effectiveness or relationship management to really begin with. Focus on those, the competencies that fall under those, and then you can certainly use kind of a phased approach for the other ones as well. But a very valid question.
Perfect. Let me squeeze in one more,
Mhm.
Jeff, if we could. This one came in. You mentioned the importance of character, which is traditionally a very difficult area to focus on for training managers and leaders. Are there any particular competencies that an organization can focus on more in order to influence or improve the character of their managers?
Yeah, and I'll go back to, it's a great question, and I could probably list a few. And if asked to just do one, I would say emotional intelligence, but that is emotional intelligence of yourself. So sometimes people think of being aware of other people's emotional intelligence, but you've got to know it about yourself to see how do you come across. Ask people some questions about, tell me how I'm perceived. Let me get an understanding that we have a perception of ourselves that is not always completely accurate. And so
Hmm.
I would begin with something like emotional intelligence for yourself. And the second one that I would go to from a trust standpoint is think about how you communicate with people, internally, externally. What's your communication pattern with people? That tends to link itself to a lot to character and to that trust factor. I could keep going on and on because unfortunately it's not just one. Those are two or three that we see pretty regularly, though. But I'd say emotional intelligence, as well as the communication.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Jeff. And I believe we are close at time, but I do also want to mention to everyone that if you visit the American Management Association's virtual booth or exhibit, I saw a few resources there that could definitely piggyback off of what Jeff was talking about today. There's a white paper, 5 skills every virtual manager needs. So I would combine, the insights that Jeff has shared, go to the booth and be able to download some of those resources, and you'll have all of that there as well. And if you have questions that pop into your head after today's session, you can go to the lounge, you can direct message Jeff and be able to send those questions over to him and he'll get those as well. So I want to thank you very much, Jeff. Lots of information. And I think that, for your session, with Tom, it was the plan is never the plan. And I think that looking at, what effect do the leaders have in terms of influencing positivity, effectiveness, performance. That's kind of my big takeaway from your session, that character and that competence part of it, which even has my brain, ping ponging a little bit and how I can also be a better manager myself.
Excellent. Great. Thanks all.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff.